So, the last several shows, there's been a little bit where I talk about some RPG or whatever that I've dug up, console or on Steam or whatever, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I made a mistake yesterday.
Okay.
I became inordinately interested with the Dragon Quest series.
That is not a mistake.
It is if you don't have anything to really play the series on, and you for some reason get so obsessed about it that you spend about 6 hours of your day looking up each episode of it, where you can play, what devices you can play it on, trying to coordinate and figure out what you need to do in order to be able to play all 11 installments of Dragon Quest.
Okay. No, that's insane on the face of it. Nobody has played all 11 installments. You have to own too many different things.
That's what I thought.
Okay.
Would you like to know what the reality turns out to be?
Yeah, go ahead.
I need a 2DS and my cell phone to play all of them.
Yeah, but but the cell phone re-releases, no. Bad.
But I've looked at the emulated versions, and they're no different than what's on the cell phone. In fact, the cell phone is actually better. At least for the first Dragon Quest.
Well, okay. First of all, the first Dragon Warrior or Dragon,
yes,
fine, yeah. But I mean, that was programmed with like a tin can and, or I guess whatever the equivalent of a tin can and string would be for programming on the NES.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? Yeah, I guess so. I mean, they're just RPGs. They're turn-based, normal, walk around, talk to people, attack, magic, item, run, RPGs. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. because I can do Dragon Quest, the first Dragon Quest or Dragon Warrior, whatever you want to call it, Dragon Quest 2 and Dragon Quest 3 on my cell phone.
Okay.
Everything else I can play on a 2DS or a 3DS, basically.
Right. And honestly, that's because the re-releases for 1 and 2 and 3 hit the Game Boy Advance prior to the DS's release.
Right.
Yeah.
If I had a Wii, I think I could do everything on the Wii.
That might be possible.
Yeah, but I don't have a Wii.
Okay.
Of course, I also don't have a DS.
Okay.
So this is presenting something of a problem. Okay, first I should clarify. I cannot actually play every item in the Dragon Quest series on a DS.
Right.
Because Dragon Quest X is a Japan-only MMO.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And unless I want to get very creative with where my system thinks it lives, and then want to learn to read Japanese, that's not going to be such a thing.
No.
But I've also, I mean, that's not, when you talk about the Dragon Quest series, of course you have to talk about more than that as well. There's something called Dragon Quest Monsters Joker 1 and 2.
Dragon Quest. Yeah, there's the Dragon Quest Monsters series.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
There's Dragon Quest, what's the Heroes? Dragon Quest Heroes?
Yeah, that's the Dynasty Warriors thing.
Yeah.
I recently started playing the first Dragon Quest Heroes.
Mm-hmm. And then there's Dragon Quest Builder,
which I absolutely love.
Yeah, and that's PS4 only.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So you begin to see my dilemma.
Well, all right. Yes and no.
Okay.
Let me begin this by saying that I personally am a fan of Dragon Warrior, and I will forever call it Dragon Warrior because, again, I grew up in the United States and I played it on a Nintendo Entertainment System. Mm-hmm. So it will forever be Dragon Warrior to me.
Okay.
Okay, and specifically, Yeah, at the time, it was you played Dragon Warrior 1, 2, and 3. Oh, and then 4. 4 came out very close to the end of the NES's cycle. And then that was the last Dragon Warrior or Dragon Quest game we saw in the United States until 7 hit the PlayStation 1 or 2. So now the thing is that the first 6 games were trilogies.
Mm-hmm.
So Dragon Quest 1, 2, and 3 form a trilogy. They're like the Alefgard trilogy, which is the name of the kingdom. And then 4, 5, and 6 form a trilogy. I think it's the Zenithian trilogy, they call it. And then Dragon Quest 7 is its own standalone game, and Dragon Quest 8, Dragon Quest 8, by the way, is a work of art.
Mm-hmm.
That game is a gorgeous, and that was the one that they released in the United States that they finally changed the name to Dragon Quest.
Right.
And that one is absolutely gorgeous game, and absolutely worth playing. I played the hell out of it on the PS2. Yeah. But no, what I'm saying is setting yourself the goal of playing absolutely all of them, like, neat. I guess that's fun, but like 7, you know, there's some really poor titles in there. Okay, like remember when we talked about going back and playing the old D&D modules?
Right.
Dragon Quest 1
Mm-hmm.
is the old D&D modules of Dragon Quest.
Right.
It was revolutionary for the time. Because it was... most people in the United States don't even realize that it was actually released before Final Fantasy existed.
Mm-hmm.
Because it wasn't released in the States until after Final Fantasy had been here for years. But they were already... When the first Final Fantasy game was released on the NES, they were already just about to release Dragon Quest 3. So, and the thing was, when they created it, the creators, Yuji Horii, he was a huge fan of computer role-playing games like Wizardry and Ultima.
Right.
And they wanted to translate that to something you could play with a controller with only 2 buttons. And that's when they came up with this simple menu-driven system and the turn-based battle, which, you know, just select fight and yada, 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 and all of that stuff, and that it was all driven by just a yes or a no button. And that's what Dragon Warrior was. It was revolutionary at the time, but story-wise, it's fairly lame in terms of story. So
Yeah.
it's not like you're getting an edifying story out of it. And as far as the gameplay, it's grindy, it's dull, and it is extremely difficult. Even Dragon Quest 2 is inscrutable, very difficult to figure out what you're trying to do. As far as I'm concerned, the series really didn't come into its own until Dragon Quest 3.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Confession
You're right.
time.
Yeah.
Confession time. I've already purchased Dragon Quest 1 for my phone.
That's fine.
And it was like $3.
Okay, I'm not trying to sell you down on this,
No,
obviously.
But I like it.
Okay. Yeah, I fully accept that people will like it.
How bad is this? Okay, so I've got Dragon Quest 1. I started playing it last night. Blah, blah, blah. You know, I'm kind of enjoying it and whatnot. I woke up this morning. I need to know some more about this Dragon Quest thing. And I did all my research and everything this morning, too. I mean, basically repeated the research I did last night to make sure I had it right.
Mm-hmm.
Went on YouTube this morning and typed in Dragon Warrior Series 1 and found the Dragon Warrior cartoons or anime. Started watching those. I'm on episode 3. And then I had reason to be in a discount sales shop earlier this afternoon, and sitting there behind their little glass case is a Nintendo DS cartridge for Dragon Quest V for $10, which I bought.
Okay.
I don't have anything to play it on. Yeah.
Yeah. See, as much as I want to keep talking about Dragon Quest, I'm almost tempted to have a little bit of an intervention here.
Uh-huh.
Only because I've noticed in discussing things like Tom Holt
Uh-huh.
and Dragon Quest,
Uh-huh.
that you don't just get interested in
No.
something.
No.
You choose obsessions where other people choose a hobby.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I know.
That's
like I'm saying, that's the problem.
okay. Oh, now I thought the problem was how am I going to play all these Dragon Quest games? And if there's anyone out there, by the way, who is really interested in getting into the Dragon Quest series and does not want to get obsessed with it, I would suggest 2 starting points to try out before you decide to buy all 11 or 10 of the ones that you can buy. Okay, if you are into old school tile-based, turn-based RPG goodness, try Dragon Quest 3. You don't need the previous ones to understand anything in Dragon Quest 3. That's where the tile-based NES versions really came into their own. If you want a really gorgeous 3D, cel-shaded, fully orchestrated soundtrack one to play with great voice acting, Dragon Quest 8. Try one of those 2, and then maybe explore more of the series.
Yeah.
Or just start buying cartridges for systems you don't own.
There you go. See, that's where I'm at. By the way, earlier I was going to mention, I used to have Dragon Quest 8.
Really?
Yeah, on the PS2. I only ever played about an hour of it, and I can't remember why now.
I can't imagine why.
I must have at some point been interrupted and just never gotten back to it.
I remember when that game came out, and when I started playing it, I think it was one of the first games that really did like the cel-shaded 3D. So it looks very much like a cartoon. And it's all done by Akira Toriyama, the guy who does all the art for the series and also does Dragon Ball Z. Dragon Ball Z? Yeah, Dragon Ball Z.
Mm-hmm.
And all the, a whole bunch of other manga and stuff. So all the character designs are gorgeous. The voice acting is fantastic. But it was the soundtrack that drew me in because it had a fully orchestrated soundtrack.
Oh, yeah.
And the soundtrack was beautiful.
I ended up here because I went looking yesterday afternoon for some information on some of the older RPGs I used to play on, like the Dreamcast and the Saturn, the Sega Saturn.
Yeah.
And I read through Albert Odyssey, Grandia 2, Lunar, Eternal Blue, Skies of Arcadia, the little appreciated Evolution 2, and then the last one in the list of the ones I used to have was Dragon Quest 8. And I went, gosh, I wonder what the rest of them were like and why I didn't finish this one. And it's now lost. I have to... Did you know Nintendo just released new 2DSs and 3DSs? They're the XL. They have a bigger screen on them, and now they're like a thing. And they just did that at the first of the month as if they knew I was coming.
I did know that. Tiny is obsessed with handhelds.
Mm-hmm.
So she has a 3DS XL and a 2DS, and I have a 3DS. And then she heard about these things coming out, and she's like, "We got to get one of those." I'm like, we have three handheld systems now that all play exactly the same little cards. Oh, if you're a 3DS haver and you want to, or any member of the DS family, and want a good entry point to Dragon Quest, do Dragon Quest 4.
Uh-huh.
Chapters of the Chosen, I think they added the subtitle. That's also a good starting point.
Oh, but you're going to tell us how your Angry Tendo came out.
Oh, yes. Actually, we have been calling it the Tiny Tendo.
Oh, the Tiny Tendo. All right.
Yeah, because it is small. It is basically, it's about 3.5 inches by 4.5 inches. I actually posted some pictures on Twitter. And Facebook, and it came out fantastically.
Awesome.
In fact, if I wanted to right now, I could go play the first 4 Dragon Quest games on the NES or the remakes on the Game Boy Advance on my HD LCD TV with a PS4 controller or a classic NES controller.
Oh man.
Though I thought with the audio discussion at the beginning, we shouldn't have a feedback issue, should we?
No, the other kind of feedback.
Oh. Oh, okay. I didn't have a place to take that joke after that. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't have an exit strategy for that punchline.
That's great. Over on our website, a user named Matthew decided to comment on show 2, where you may remember we had a brief discussion about these standard fantasy sort of RPGs with their elves and dwarves and goblins and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we tried to think up things that didn't have, the usual batch of classes and that sort of thing.
Yeah, let me guess. Somebody sent us the one exception they could think of.
Monty Cook's Arcana Unearthed.
Okay.
No elves, no dwarves.
Neat.
Apparently,
yes,
we forgot.
Exceptions exist, but they are the exception rather than the rule, which is the comment that we were making. That it seems a little weird that the idea of an entire genre devoted to the fantastic has become very bog standard.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah.
Matthew. Okay, thank you.
I've been invited to a game of Hackmaster.
That's good.
It's in Portland.
I assume Portland, Oregon, not Portland, Maine.
Well, that's my assumption as well.
Mm-hmm.
Which is nice, and I appreciate the offer. I get to Portland about once every 2 years or so.
Okay, so
in 2
maybe
years,
one long session, maybe a one shot.
Yeah.
That'll give you plenty of time to make the character because it is Hackmaster.
No kidding.
It's not GURPS, but it's up there.
That's true. Rollmaster, anybody? Anyway, it was a very nice offer. If I find myself in Portland or headed to Portland at some future date, I may get in touch with you for a short game in a neutral location. In show 3, which at the time of this recording just went up Monday. 2 days
that was our
ago.
special treat.
Or yesterday, yeah. Show 3, we talked quite a bit about the problems with live play stuff.
Yes.
And several people have gotten a hold of me and said, hey, you should check out X podcast. Where this podcast here or this podcast over here or whatever. They do a really good job and it's tightly edited and all that kind of stuff. And while I appreciate the suggestions, it's important to understand that not only do I know that podcasts in general tend to do a slightly better job of hitting that middle ground, that pro-am kind of ground. I've made one that does that. So I'm well aware of what it takes to make one. But it's also, that's not really the point I was getting at. That podcasts XX, YY, ZZ, all that stuff. It's really the video live play stuff that I'm mostly griping about.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the suggestions, and I'll check some of those out. But yeah.
Well, it did also become more of an academic discussion than
this is
looking for stuff to scratch that itch.
Yeah. True.
Which we admitted was your itch, not mine.
Right. You're right. Yeah, I think the reason particularly I focused on the video ones is because the video stuff is generally much easier to access. It's not as big a barrier trying to get to a video live play as it is trying to get to a podcast doing the same thing.
Right. Well, Twitch makes it much easier to find a game of D&D that you didn't know was out there.
Right.
just by showing there's this many videos right now, or there's this many streams right now of D&D. Whereas podcasts, if you don't know what you're looking for, are very hard to find.
Right. You have to know it's there in order to know it's there.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with every podcast, not just live play podcasts and whatnot. But yeah, it's a lot easier. You just you go to your browser and you type in live stream Dungeons and Dragons, and you get a bajillion hits of whoever's doing whatever, either on YouTube or on Twitch or that kind of thing. Do the same thing looking for podcasts. Well, first off, you're not going to find a live stream for a podcast. Secondly, a lot of those live play podcasts are much harder to get to because you got to, they don't surface well in Google searches, and then when they do, you still have to have a way to play them that's not necessarily intuitive.
Right.
I got on Twitter a message from a fellow whose name I'm probably going to mispronounce. Stephen Quinones. He goes by Rig the Gear on Twitter.
Okay.
He sent me a message. I don't think English is his first language, but he did a good enough job. I was able to sort of interpret what he was talking about.
Right.
He says, I'm going to disagree with you about live streaming. I've met more people watching a professional stream that join a game or reignite their love for D&D. And he goes on to say that Critical Role is very upfront about the experience they offer, not being typical, and that all games vary and they are all actors, etc. That kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And he's right. I mean, the discussion has come up before. Mercer says right up front, this is not actual D&D. This is a bunch of actors, and we're acting at D&D.
Right.
That kind of stuff,
Right. I don't disagree there. And though there are others who are not so upfront about it. Like I said, Dice Camera Action, I don't think includes those same disclaimers. They're Perkins.
Right.
But even so, that's still not. I mean, that's tangential to the point we were making.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, the point is appreciated, and you're right. They are upfront. So I think that's probably in response to the fact that I said that you were selling a dishonest experience.
Right.
But I did not mean that in the sense that Critical Role is inherently deceptive in what they are doing. Just that it is not giving people a true to life experience.
Right.
Whether they admit that or not doesn't change the fact that that's what it is.
Yeah. I'm glad that Stephen is aware of people who are finding games and getting back into D&D because of these streams. I'm glad that's happening. But the question I find myself asking because of that is how many of those same folks find that the experience is different than what they expected based on those streams, and then how many of them stick with it after that?
Well, that's a good question, and there's no way to answer it.
Yeah.
And ultimately, there's no way to answer any of these questions. And this is where we come to the essential problem of discussing the industry and the community around gaming, as opposed to the games themselves. Everything is anecdotal. Mm-hmm. There's no hard data. Okay, nobody can even agree on how many people are in the role-playing game community at large. Nobody knows worldwide how many people are even playing these games.
Right.
Wizards of the Coast knows approximately how many tables are out there playing D&D at any given moment. Approximately, because they've done the market research, but they're not telling anybody.
Right.
So, and at various times, Wizards of the Coast has even made claims about the size of the role-playing game community, which have varied depending on the reason for the claim. Like when Hasbro gives a shareholder call and talks about D&D, they have one number, And when there was a court case years ago in third edition, I can't remember. There was some copyright case or something. They spouted a different number, and when Mike Merles is bragging on Twitter about how great D&D is doing right now, they use a different number. And whenever they talk, their metrics also change. Which is sometimes they'll talk about how many core rule books they've sold, versus other times they'll talk about how much how many people they think are playing the game or things like that. So depending on the point they're trying to make, they even change the way to measure it. So we fall into this problem of everything we try to discuss is going to be anecdotal. And then every time we say something like, well, in my experience this, there's always going to be someone to email us and say, well, in my experience that.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll never actually nail down the truth. We're all just guessing.
Yeah. Which is fine, I think. Given what we do and don't know, we have to guess. If we're ever going to talk about anything, we have to guess at some point.
Right.
Yeah. So that's fine. And like I say, I appreciate the feedback. I appreciate Stephen taking the time to chat with me on Twitter. That was good of him to share what he was thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Even though we might sit here and disagree with some of the feedback we're getting, or I might be snarky about it because that's who I am, we definitely appreciate it all. Mm-hmm. It's nice to know people are listening and have their own experiences. And the only way we keep making guesses and having things to discuss is because we see all these viewpoints. I mean, I went back and listened to that episode, episode 3, when it went live on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was interesting for me to listen back to, because I hadn't listened to it since we recorded it, because you actually ended up changing my mind a little bit on the worth of these streams in general.
Yeah.
Of course, it then brought up an entire new question,
mm-hmm.
Which perhaps we will discuss a little bit later.
Perhaps.
Yes. But anyway, thanks very much, Stephen, for the perspective on that.
Yes, thank you very much. Over on YouTube, because we put episodes up on YouTube now.
I heard you threaten to do that.
Mm-hmm. Pile of Feet is the username on episode 3 as well. You remember we talked about XPs as a sort of budget for the GM to build encounters out of. The pool of XP the players get is mirrored by a pool of XP that the GM gets, with which he can build subsequent encounters and sort of give a method to the GM to make sure things are much more closely balanced.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So Pile of Feet wrote in to ask how aid, like health potions, magic weapons, safe places to rest, would play into that. He suggests that maybe the GM could get 500-ish ghost XP for extra challenges, monsters, whatever, depending on the party level, and that the GM can add a complimentary amount of challenges in exchange for giving the party some helpful thing, which is an interesting idea.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Especially given that 5th edition, for example, makes no provision for encounter difficulties that may or may not be complicated by traps and things like that. Right.
And it's something that is a problem with any sort of a rigorous system of determining the challenge of an encounter. Is that there's, in a tactical game like D&D, there are so many intangibles that can play into it. Even something as simple as terrain. If you've got, like very narrow, windy passages with no straight lines of sight, spellcasters and ranged combatants are going to be quite weak in that combat. Just because they can't get lines of sight to their targets. And that stuff can have a really drastic effect on the combat, particularly, in general, the average 5-person adventuring party is going to have 2 melee focused characters, 2 very ranged focused characters, and 1 character who switches between the two fairly comfortably. So if you're tanking, if there's a situation where all range combat is shut down, then two-fifths to three-fifths of the party becomes weakened or useless. So yeah, there's no allowance for that stuff in general, because to some extent it becomes utterly subjective. It's there's no way to assign a number to that. Even the game that I just played, where it's like, well, on average, 2 to 3 players will be useless in the combat. That's just like a rough guess that you sort of learn from building combats over time. But there's no numerical thing like, well, then the fight should be 3/5 as much experience or whatever. The other thing is things like safe places to rest and other bits of adventure pacing. Like those are already built into the assuming we're talking about 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
Things like safe places to rest. That is an assumption of the game. Part of the assumption of the game is that if you can get through what the DMG defines as an adventuring day, which is going to be 6 to 8 combats or 6 to 8 encounters, which means that players should get, or the characters should get through 6 to 8 encounters before they need a long rest. Okay, in there, they should be able to freely take short rests, because that is how they unlock their hit dice. That is how they unlock their, which basically all of their recoveries. Mm-hmm. So that they can stretch themselves through those 6 to 8 combats. Otherwise, they won't. And that's why, like, if you see a character ability that is keyed to, once between each short rest, that is a ability that won't break the game if the character can do it once per encounter. Okay, once per short rest basically became a sort of pseudo code for, at worst comes to worst, if they had it once per encounter, that wouldn't be a disaster. Now, in general, what you'll find is that the game designers look like they assume that you would take maybe 2 short rests in an adventuring day, and not really 6 to 7 of them, depending on how many encounters there are. But the game assumes that the characters can choose when to take those short rests. But then the game also goes back and forth on that a lot. And, in general, if we were building a game around this system, we would have to kind of strip out what 5th edition thinks, or how 5th edition thinks experience points and challenges should be calculated, and fix that system first. Because it doesn't, there's some real wonkiness to it. And I think I would go right down. I would actually strip it down to the point where I would even redo the XP budgets for individual monsters. In fact, I was thinking about how exactly to do this. There might be, if you follow my website, there might be a big article coming in the near future about completely revamping the encounter adventure building and XP budget system to make it easier, more intuitive, and work better.
All right. So, well, we'll look forward to that.
Yeah.
And then people can stop saying that I'm preventing you from getting articles done.
Yeah. No. Okay. Yeah. I guess we should address that because that comment was not the only comment I've received on that. By the way. No. Brian and this project are not preventing me from getting articles done. There are some issues that have pushed my schedule again towards the end of the month. There will be articles coming. Mm-hmm. I have not yet failed to deliver 4 articles each month on my website, even if I've had to work for 2 weeks to crank out 4 articles in that time. I will not fail to do that, but there's some things going on that were a bit unexpected. So since we are on the subject of that episode, I guess episode 3, mm-hmm. where we were talking about Twitch streaming and all the different streams and the thing.
Yes.
It got me thinking about several very unrelated things.
Uh-oh.
Or seemingly unrelated things. Because, I mean, it's like, because I was listening to that conversation about Twitch, and it also got me started thinking about YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And then it got me thinking about Steam, the online video game market.
Right.
And the open gaming license for 3rd edition. Uh-huh.
Okay.
And all of these things are going, well, the open gaming license, not so much, because its problems are done.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the problem of the open gaming license has now become the problem of how can D&D put Pathfinder out of business. But once upon a time, it had a different problem. And they're all related by the same problem, or the same basic idea. So Steam has been going through all of these issues because there is so much content out there that is garbage that they can't sort through it all. And they can't find good ways to curate the pile of garbage because there's so much of it. So they're constantly having problems with like developers who put like these cheap things made with default assets that they get just from downloading like the Unity engine, it's basically the equivalent of making your video game in a Super Mario level editor.
Okay.
And then selling it as a full game.
Right. This sounds familiar to a bunch of things that happened in the OGL as well.
Right. Yeah, because this is where I'm going. Meanwhile, YouTube is having this huge problem because they have this advertising issue where advertisers want control over what types of videos their advertisements appear on, but there is so much content that is uploaded every day and every minute and every hour on YouTube that nobody can curate the content except by these algorithms that are fraught with all sorts of problems. And this is not even getting into all the conspiracy theories about YouTube, espousing certain viewpoints and deplatforming certain people. I'm not even going into that. We're just talking about the basic problem of YouTube has so much content. They cannot curate it all. And now advertisers are starting to pull their money out rather than have their ads run on, reprehensible stuff. Mm-hmm. You go on Twitch, you search on Twitch, and you can see, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of streamers playing some of the more popular games, all of whom are playing to empty rooms, and a lot of the streams are just terrible. And there's really no way to, other than looking at the viewer count, there's no way to know a good Twitch stream from a bad one until you jump into it. And you're going to go into the ones that have lots of people viewing because that's the way to find the good ones. Which means that, those lesser known Twitch channels are never going to get exposure. And then at the same time, that's why you have these groups on social media who are like trying to bring exposure to smaller Twitch channels. And all of that is related to what you were mentioning, the open gaming license. So when 3rd edition came out, one of the things they wanted to do was allow for lots of community-generated content because that's what makes the game good. It's a community-based game. Somewhere along the line, by the way, Wizards of the Coast forgot that community-created content is what makes the game good, which is why there are so many problems now trying to publish for D&D. But once upon a time, anybody could publish any D&D product just by including this legal disclaimer at the back of the book. And you could refer to other D&D products. I mean, there were rules and limitations, but you could publish a D&D product under the open gaming license. And that led to this massive problem where there were so many third-party things on the market, and so many of them were crap, that basically the whole gaming, the whole D20 system was just buried under a pile of garbage. And then, of course, we could even go into crowdfunding. We could go into things like Kickstarter and Patreon and stuff, because now anybody can just get money for a project or make money doing something. And all of this points to the same thing. When you remove the barriers to entry, or the barriers to entry from a market, you get this huge pile of garbage that nobody can keep track of, that nobody can keep up with. Everything is just buried under garbage. Now, I totally agree that markets should be free to enter. And I mean, I obviously I rely on that myself. I want to get my own products out there someday, you know. Hell, even my blog, just the existence of my website is because it is so easy now to just create a website, you know, and all these people live streaming their games is because it's very easy to live stream a game, and anyone can make YouTube videos, and it takes virtually no real investment to do it. And that's great because creators can now be seen who might never have been seen before. But now I find myself wondering, because we've come so far in the other direction, is it better for a product to never be seen because it is buried under a pile of garbage and no one will ever find it, or for that product to never reach the market in the first place? Either way, we're gonna lose out on good products just because we can't keep track of them all, or because when you erect barriers to entry, good products can't get in. You know, there's a certain number of good designers who just can't overcome those barriers to entry, and you'll lose out. So, sir,
I feel like there do need to be some barriers to entry.
Right.
Some minimum standards that need to be met in order to get into the market proper.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't really have a grip on how tall and how tough those barriers should be.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, under the OGL, the barrier to entry was basically make sure you print the OGL license in your book.
Right. That was zero barrier to entry, basically.
Zero.
The only thing to keep in mind was that in the early and mid 2000s, when the OGL was at its height, it was a lot harder to get a product to publication.
Right, because you had to actually have the money on hand before you could publish a product. You couldn't just stick it out there for everybody else who might want it to pay for.
Right, and ebooks and PDFs
ebooks were not a big thing.
Yeah, they were not a big thing yet. Mm-hmm. So there were, even in that case, there were substantial barriers to entry.
Yes.
You know.
And yet so many were able to cross those barriers.
And to be fair, we did get good stuff out of that.
Oh yeah, some of it was, you know, pretty brilliant.
Goodman Games, Dungeon Crawl Classics, all of that came out of that. Mm-hmm. Paizo was the ultimate beneficiary of all of that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but there was a lot of stuff that never would have existed without that.
Right.
But what I'm asking is, on a philosophical level, if you will, on an academic level, if you obviously we're going to set a middle point somewhere, but on the middle point, do you err on the side of higher barriers to entry, understanding that it will keep some good products from ever reaching the market, or on the side of low barriers to entry, understanding that good products will never be seen? And for the assumption in my question is this: there are X number of good products that you want people to be able to see, and the same number would fail to get in as would be missed under the pile of garbage. Okay, numerically, it's the same. There's 10 good products out of every 100 that either never reach the market or get overlooked because there's too much garbage. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I would at least like the opportunity, however slim it might be, to find the good stuff under the garbage.
And that's exactly what I thought. Until...
You have laid a cunning trap, sir.
Well, no, that was my answer. Because I'm a free market guy.
Yeah.
I'm like, I want the opportunity to find the product. I want the opportunity to dig through the sewage because I will. Except I won't. That's the thing. We all think we will, but we really won't. But aside from that, the more I started to think about this, the more I realized that even if the number of missed products are the same in either scenario, I can make a case that the pile of sewage is worse for the industry as a whole.
Yes, you can certainly make that case. You can make the case that the other side, the high barrier to entry, so that some good products never get made, still manages to raise the overall bar to which all other products must come.
That is part of it, yes. But the other problem is what happened, we saw with third edition.
Yeah.
And what we're starting to see on Steam and on Twitch and on YouTube is people dropping out of the market in frustration.
Mm-hmm.
Customers, I don't mean like creators.
Right.
Customers tired of ending up with garbage and not being able to tell the garbage from the not garbage, throwing up their hands and saying it's not worth it.
It's like you open a door and you've got a library of every book in the world ever written. Which ones are the good ones if you don't know anything about books?
Right. And the problem is every product that is a role-playing game product that is on a role-playing game shelf is going to be seen as representative of the industry to the person who's just starting to get into role-playing games.
Mm-hmm.
There is a limited amount of fatigue, or a limited amount of stamina people have for wading through sewage. And while those of us who have been in the community for a long time will wade through more garbage because we want to find the diamonds in the sewage, the new people have much less tolerance for wading through sewage looking for the good stuff.
Yeah. If you make it too hard for them, they're not going to do it.
Yeah. So that was the journey in my head of, I realized that I would rather err on the side of keeping creators out of the market and lamenting the sad few products that never were.
Is there... I always think there's a third way. Okay? I always think there's a third way. And sometimes I find one and it's good, and sometimes I find one and it's bad. But I always think there's a third way. And I'm wondering, because I'm thinking of a gentleman we know on Twitter by the name of Pangalactic.
Uh-huh.
Who, as part of what he does, not only makes adventures and puts them up on the DM's Guild, like he did Bullet Storm.
Yeah.
Or Bullet Storm. Depending
or
on
Bullet Storm, depending on your pronunciation.
Yes.
Landshark Storm.
Yes, Landshark Storm. Which was an excellent product, and I highly recommend.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because now we have an excuse to put a link to it in the show notes.
Yes, we do. And we will. But he also, aside from doing that and making adventures, he also goes through the DM's Guild and rates and reviews adventures and products that come up in there.
Right.
And I'm just wondering if there isn't this third way. Admittedly, it'll be like sipping from a fire hose.
Mm-hmm.
But if there isn't this third way where people can get involved as a group to point out the good stuff. I mean, that's basically a reviewer's job.
Right. So,
on
the one hand, you've got reviewers.
Right.
Right.
On the other hand,
and on the other hand, you've got, star ratings and reviews and thumbs up and thumbs down.
Right. And I know every product that goes up on DM's Guild has a comment section and a stars and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is, and I'm thinking through my own thing here. The problem with that is that the people who tend to rate and review are not always the most critically, no, I don't want to say critical. I want to say critically discerning of people.
they are well intentioned.
Yes.
For that, we're not questioning that they're misusing their, you know, their opportunity for criticism to do, you know, destroy products. We're just you're suggesting they are just not like criticism is a skill.
Mm-hmm.
Critical consumption. You know, watching an evaluation. Evaluation is a skill.
Right.
Right. And there are other skills involved in that too, like communicating your evaluation. Like, there was a very interesting video that this weird YouTuber Donkey put up, where he was talking about video game reviews and why video game reviews suck. And obviously it was a bit inflammatory, and you know, video game reviewers, being the mature and thick-skinned bunch that they were, immediately lost their freaking minds and started pouting and screaming. But he had very good points in there, and one of the most important points that he had was that it is important that a reviewer gives the reader or listener or whatever enough of an insight into their own preferences that the reviewer can then, that you can then decide how much of the reviewer's own opinions you're going to like.
Exactly.
So like, me personally, I'll use the example he used because it was a good example. Is he doesn't like anime, he doesn't like turn-based combat, and he doesn't like Japanese RPGs. So if he comes out in a review and makes all of this clear and says Persona 5 is the greatest game ever, which was a Japanese turn-based RPG, that means something. That means to you that even if you are not a fan of those same things that he is not a fan of, it might be worth checking out because it's doing something exceptional.
Right.
And at the same time, if he comes out and says you know, I hate this thing, you know, he plays, I can't think of another turn-based Japanese RPG, right? Like Final Fantasy 15. It's like Final Fantasy 15 sucked. You can read that for what it is and say, well, he doesn't like anime and he doesn't like Japanese RPGs and doesn't like turn-based RPGs, but I love all of those things, so I'll probably like it, or at least I can go seek another reviewer.
Right.
Right. So there is a review skill. Now, sadly, a lot of reviewers these days don't seem to have it anymore. But anyway, but I digress.
It's not limited to just video games either.
No, of course, this is just an example.
Right.
Any review has to give you a sense of the reviewer's subjective biases so that you can then evaluate the reviewer, so that you can then evaluate the review.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, okay, Siskel and Ebert, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I learned after having paid attention to Siskel for quite some time, I learned that he did not like the same things in movies that I did.
Mm-hmm.
And that clued me into the fact that if he really didn't like a movie, there was a fair chance that I might enjoy it.
Right.
Because we were basically diametric. Not that I'm a world-class movie reviewer, just that the things I knew he was into and liked and didn't like were I was able, based on that information, to say, oh, well, he didn't like these and these, but these are definitely things I enjoy, so maybe I'll go see this movie. You know, even though he was telling me not to.
I used to do the same thing with Zero Punctuation. You know, the rapid fire 5-minute video game. Basically, he tears them apart. He's not really a reviewer. He's just a critic because he literally just criticizes. Yep. So, and I used to do the same thing with him because over time you develop a sense of what he likes and what he doesn't like and what he marks down a game for. And there were games I bought based on his hatred that I absolutely loved.
Yeah.
You know, but you have to be able to do that. But I understand where you're coming from there and saying that you can put all these tools in place. But each of the platforms that we discussed has these tools.
Yeah, and it still isn't helping.
Well, you have several issues there. I mean, obviously the first issue is the one you mentioned, where you're relying on the armchair reviewer, which is fantastic if you have thousands of people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if thousands of people review something, then you're going to get rid of the outliers and the crazy people and the trolls and the people who are absolutely terrible and arrive at something that is sort of close to a general opinion of something. You know? And then if you allow people to review the reviews and decide which ones are helpful and which ones aren't, then the good reviews will rise to the top and the bad. So you have these layers of it. But that only works when there's a lot of them. And now, with the sheer deluge of products, nobody can keep track of it all. There's so many things, like, you know, on Steam and on YouTube that get just that nobody can actually curate this stuff anymore. You know, and you could have a dedicated community devoted to doing just that, but even then, as the market gets bigger, then, you know, they can't keep up. And even then, in a market like the RPG market, if a product gets 2 or 3 reviews or comments or upvotes or downvotes or stars or whatever, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And that's not enough to really inform an opinion.
No. Because of the way people treat RPG products and whatnot, and the amount of involvement they have with them, and the natural bias towards only saying something when there's something wrong or something you don't like.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of you know, strong negative or strong positive reviews will shoot something up and down the scale of good and bad like nobody's business. Whereas things that really have a much more involved community and much more, what's the word, fine-tuned kind of recommendations and algorithms and that kind of stuff, it's much harder to move things up and down.
Right.
You know, like if you go over to BoardGameGeek.com
mm-hmm.
and look at their rankings for all the board games that are available,
right,
it really takes a significant positive or negative reaction to move something up and down that list because of the way they've tuned their algorithms that handle that review stuff.
Right.
Okay.
But see, and I could make 2 points about that, though. First of all, board games have a much larger market than something like role-playing games.
Mm-hmm.
But they also have a much smaller market than something like video games.
Right.
And it's also much harder to publish a role-playing or a board game product than it is to publish a role-playing game book.
Yes. Those are all correct.
Yeah, so that, you know, Board Game Geek is, it like, if there was a sweet spot of market size and engagement and barriers to entry, board games might be it.
Yeah.
You know?
Could be. But
they're hard to publish. They're costly. Yeah. And it's harder to fund a print run of a board game on something like Kickstarter because it is more expensive to do such a print run.
Yeah, and it's more technically demanding too.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to say here's a $30 board game, and I'm going to release a PDF and that's all you're going to get. It's not going to be ever a physical product.
Right. There's fulfillment issues in there too.
Right.
And then of course we have also seen, you know, crowdfunding board game disasters.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the investment involved, when they go down, they're not quite as bad as some of the larger video games, but when they go down hard.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, look at what was the Cthulhu Monopoly or Cthulhu Atlantic City thing?
Oh, that, yeah, I can't remember what it was called, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Gambling with Cthulhu or whatever it was.
That was just a disaster.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I want an opportunity to find the gems that are out there, but I also think that some barrier to entry is necessary in order to sort of bring up the overall quality of what is available.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you. It was more just sort of an academic point of which side do you err on? You know, where you're going to lose stuff either way. So accepting the fact that you're going to lose stuff and assuming that you lose the same amount either way, for the industry as a whole, which one is better? And I agree with you. I would, my personal impulse is still the freest market possible.
Let me ask you the question in a different way. I think it's the same question, and I'm going to try it in a different way and see what happens.
Okay.
Okay. Would you rather have 5 really good role-playing products available, but a lot of garbage to get through to get to them? Or would you rather have 30 or 40 reasonably good role-playing products available, but no real gems?
Fundamentally, I don't think that's the same question. But now, and the other thing is that, like, I'm also trying to think, not me personally,
right,
but which is better for the market? Which is better for the average consumer? Rather than just what's best for me. Though, honestly, even now, I guess I would rather have the 30 okay ones.
Yeah.
It's
weird, isn't it?
It is.
It's like, the thing is, you sort of intuitively know which one is quote unquote right. But the preference is for a general improvement overall rather than a specific, these must exist.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's always the concept of the high tide that lifts all boats.
Mm-hmm.
So if the overall quality of the market is at a higher level, then yeah, you might lose some of the great outliers. But just about anything you pick up is going to be okay.
Yeah.
And, it also stands to reason because, like, economically, we rate losses worse than, we are loss focused. Mentally speaking, if you have the opportunity to lose $10 or gain $10, if those two things are going to happen, people rate the loss of $10 as much worse than people rate the gain of $10 being good.
Yeah.
That is, the gain has to be substantially higher before it feels the same. Like, people might have to have the opportunity to gain $50 before they're happy to risk losing 10, because we rate losses higher than gains. And it's just standard economic principle.
Right.
Along with risk aversion, it's just one of the things we know about the way people make choices. So in that respect, if you think about crappy products as landmines, because that's really what it is. You walk into the store, product looks good, the cover looks good. Oh, this looks like fun. I'm going to buy this. You drop your $30 or your $50 or your $20, whatever it is, and you get home and bam, you have nothing. You have just wasted $20 on garbage or $50 on garbage. You basically stepped on a landmine. It's how many landmines do we want floating around in the market?
Right.
And I mean, and this is really the thing. Okay, so you have a field, right? Mm-hmm. This is the way to think of this question. You have a big field, and everybody has a shovel, and they can go digging in the field. Now, you can bury a bunch of $5 bills, or you can bury a bunch of landmines and a few $100 bills. Which field do you want to be digging around in? Oh.
Yeah.
But the problem is now, as you abstract further and further from the actual question, you're no longer thinking about this in terms of, because when we get down to it, it sucks to spend $30 on something that is garbage. Right. And we've all done it. But it is also not the same as stepping on a landmine and blowing your leg off. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, it's just games. And no matter how bad you get that game home and it's a huge disappointment, and you wasted the money, and it's terrible, whatever it is, board game, role-playing game, video game, whatever. As bad as that is, by tomorrow you're over it.
Yeah.
You know?
Hopefully you're over it.
Yeah. But the problem is, and this is where we go back to my fear, if that happens to you too many times, you stop hunting for the good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, oh, maybe I just... Like, imagine somebody trying to get into anime for the first time. There's lots of different anime there.
Yeah.
Right? And imagine that they go out to a store, you know, or they get Crunchyroll, right? The anime streaming thing, I think it is.
Uh-huh.
Right? And every weekend for 10 weeks, they watch a different anime. And they just have the worst luck, and they pick nothing but terrible anime. They just bad luck. Whoop, I picked that one, it sucked. Picked that one, it sucked. Picked that one, it sucked. At what point do they say, you know what? Maybe I just hate anime.
Yeah. Maybe anime is not my thing.
Right. The more, the higher the garbage to good stuff ratio, you know, the higher the quantity over quality ratio, the more people are going to end up just accidentally taking home so many bad things that they decide, we don't need this anymore.
And the way to prevent that is to have a guide.
Well, certainly. But, you know, when there's 6 billion anime and 80 hours of anime being uploaded every minute or whatever is now being uploaded on YouTube, there ain't no guide.
Mm-mm.
You know? Now, I agree that the role-playing game space is much smaller than the YouTube space. But it is interesting to see that there's just this same pattern of problems.
Right.
And
well, I'm... Yes, barriers to entry that mean that some good things can't get in. That's where I'm increasingly coming down on. I can't... And this is purely because of my experience during the OGL.
Right.
And purely because I have looked at the DM's Guild and seen some of the things that are in there being offered for actual money. And it is not a comforting feeling.
You know what got me during the OGL era? Christmas presents from people who knew just enough about role-playing games to be brave enough to go to a role-playing game store and try to pick up a book I didn't have.
Right.
I mean, I ended up with so many third-party monster books that were just horrendous as Christmas and birthday presents.
Yep.
Now people are buying me landmines.
It's actually worse than getting underwear.
Right?
There was so much bad stuff. So much bad stuff.
Yeah, it's a shame because there were a few gems. Like there are still a couple of tiny things that I still have sitting on my shelf that I'm glad I found. But like AEG put out these 2 books, the Toolbox and then the Ultimate Toolbox.
Mm-hmm.
And they were just pages and pages and pages and pages of stuff to include in your game. You know, there's just lists of the names of inns and medieval foods and all sorts of just random little details. You know, 6,000 NPC names. And those things were gold, but how many horrible products did I have to wade through to discover them?
I can remember looking through the DM's Guild, I don't know, it had to have been 4 months or so after it started up.
Mm-hmm.
And just seeing things like lists of 20 items to find in a tavern, or lists of... Basically lists. Lots and lots of lists with no real details on them that people wanted money for.
Well, sure. Those are your asset flips.
Yeah.
Those are the equivalent of the people who buy the default assets in a Unity engine or a whatever other engine, and just throw them on the Steam store. You know, build a game with that.
Yeah. And keep in mind, I'm not saying that all lists are bad, that all
No.
people who make lists are bad. I'm saying that there seems to be a preponderance of people who have created just quick little short fast lists of things and then tried to get money for them without much thought.
Well, to be fair, because I don't want to fall into the risk of assuming, or fall into the trap of assuming motives here.
Right.
I'm sure there are more than a few of those people who genuinely think, wow, this list was actually helpful for me building my adventure.
Mm-hmm.
I'll make it available.
Mm-hmm.
And nowadays, the current market we're back in the 80s sort of market thinking, where if I can make money doing this, why not?
Anyway, that was my point, being that a lot of what came out in the OGL was about equivalent to that sort of thing. Very little thought, just throw it together, get it out there, and try to get some money for it before somebody realizes really how bad it is.
Yeah, and that's...
I mean, how many times did you get like a third-party modular adventure where the encounters weren't balanced at all? There wasn't much connecting the encounters. There was no real story going on.
Oh, God. That was half of the stuff out. That was half the modules you bought. It was a complete crapshoot.
Yep. I can remember we played a third-party module. I don't remember what it was, but we were going to some Druid's Grove or something, and he had built a hedge maze and populated the hedge maze with all kinds of bad things and whatnot. And then he had died, and his maze had gone kind of wild, and the creatures in it had gone wild as well. And so we were supposed to go there and clear it out. And we went through this whole maze 3 times, trying to figure out what the big bad encounter of the adventure was, only to discover that we had found it within the first 10 minutes of being in the maze, killed it, and not even noticed. It was like, that couldn't possibly have been the big bad. That never even hit us. So we never did anything. We stabbed it twice and it died. And it was supposed to be of level for us, but there were tons of that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And see, that's ultimately what bothers me about all of this, because as much as you want to tell yourself, well, I could write a good product and it will rise above all of this other stuff. The market will reward the good products. The truth is, I think that's now beyond the market to do. There's just no way to find it.
Yeah, I'm with you. What surfaces stuff, good or bad, is not the market. It's the number of people you can get to discuss it somewhere, like on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, who will jump in and raise it, good or bad, raise it up a bunch against the other stuff where they have no other support,
Right.
And at that point, it's not about being good or bad. It's about just how many people do you know?
Yeah. So now popularity contests are deciding our markets.
This is kind of from a weird source. I don't really understand how or why they decided they needed to do this, okay? But this is from 538.com.
Okay.
Which is...
Wait.
Yeah.
Wait.
Yeah.
I didn't connect that.
I know.
When I saw where the two... That's,
Yep.
That's interesting.
That's Nate Silver. That is Nate Silver.
Huh.
And for some people, that is going to be an immediate problem. And for other people, it will not be.
Well,
But for the purposes of this discussion, we're not dealing with that.
Right. I mean, yeah. Okay. Obviously, he's good at data aggregation, if nothing else.
Yes, he is absolutely, apparently brilliant at data aggregation.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming this came up in their culture section.
For reasons.
I don't know.
But by the way,
yeah.
if anybody's not aware, 538 is a website that got basically it compiles political data, specifically political opinion polls. That's how it got its start, and the name comes from the number of electors in the Electoral College, doesn't it? That's why it's 538.
I think so.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's, for whatever reason, this website, which is mainly for aggregating political polls and opinion polls, did this thing.
Yes. And fair enough, it is data. It can be processed and conclusions can be drawn from it.
Absolutely.
All right. So in that respect, I guess it belongs on 538. It just doesn't seem very intuitive given their readership and the kind of people who would be interested in these things. Anyway, having equivocated all of that, what we were presented with, about a week ago, was a table of the most popular races and classes in Dungeons and Dragons. And the data was compiled from class and race combinations created on D&D Beyond from August 15th to September 15th, 2017. D&D Beyond is the online tool set that D&D has decided to have, which is a whole nother kettle of fish.
Speaking of tabling discussions.
Yeah, we're gonna scurry away from that discussion very rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So it's per 100,000 characters that players created on D&D Beyond from August 15th to September 15th. It is a table. Every race, every class combination is on it with how many of those exist per 100,000 characters. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So what is this table telling us? This table is telling us that people really, 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 really like human fighters.
It's the simplest class to play.
Yep. There were 4,888 human fighters. I'm quickly scanning, and it looks like it wins by at least 1,800 over the next closest competitor.
Yeah. Well, in general, it's interesting because we sort of get this. Because of the way the stuff is organized, we can sort of see in order of preference what the most popular classes and races are.
Mm-hmm.
And fighter tops it out as basically 13%, because it's per 1,000 per 100,000 characters. So fighters are about 14%, then rogues at 11%, then wizards at about 10%, and then barbarians and clerics at 9% each. The ranger and the paladin about 9%. So yeah, it starts to drop off at the warlock, monk.
Yeah,
it's really the druid is apparently the least popular.
Yeah. The race preferences are, frankly, I'm amazed. 25% played humans,
and yet that doesn't surprise me. The revelation that the most common character is the human fighter does not surprise me.
Doesn't surprise you in any way, does it?
Nope.
It doesn't suggest to you that it's not very imaginative?
No, not in the least.
Okay.
No, it's
all right.
Yeah, I mean it's a simple character to grasp, but it's fun.
Yeah.
It's
also, truth be told, a very simple character to build if you're just poking around and testing things out.
Well, see, now that's the issue. And if I really, really wanted to pick apart this data because it was something that I felt actually mattered, in which case it doesn't. I am very curious about how this data was actually collected and compiled. And I would like to know, first of all, per 100,000 characters. Okay, so we're counting characters, not players.
No.
I would like to know how many players that entails. And I would also like to know, like they say per 100,000 characters, I would like to know the total number of characters generated on D&D Beyond. Actually, more for academic curiosity than anything else. I'd really like to know how many people are on this thing and how many players are on there.
Right.
Because you do have, like, first of all, you get a bunch of players who create multiple characters. They're just constantly creating characters. And then, as you said, the number for human fighter is probably skewed because that's baby's first character. So I'm testing out the software. Right. I just started using it. Let's see, what I can make. But I still feel that's I pretty much see a fighter in every group.
Hang on here. Let me check something out. Because I have a sneaky suspicion I might know something else that has occurred.
Oh, really?
I was wondering if the interface was laid out in such a way or done in such a way that certain races or classes were defaults in the layout or were up towards the top in the selection trees. And that does not seem to be the case.
Oh, okay. You're actually checking out D&D Beyond here to see what was the easiest.
Right.
Like if you just were clicking through to click through, what character would you land on?
Yep, you got it.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
There's nothing that is just sitting there in the selection box. You physically have to pick what you want, and they're in alphabetical order.
But all right.
Okay.
Anyway. Like,
yes,
putting aside critiquing this like as some sort of important academic data collection, like we are going to present a paper to the UN on this,
right? And
just looking at what we see here, I think one thing that really stands out is how strongly the race class synergies are. How strong the race class synergies are. So. Right. Obviously humans by their abilities are pretty much effective across the board. They can play anything, but once you start looking at the other races, you start to see that there are definite preferences. Like, elves, they obviously lean toward ranger, but they lean toward ranger, wizard, and rogue, which plays right into their, and druids to a lesser extent, but then druids are the least popular class. The fact, by the way, if any of my players are listening and you have complained about me banning the druid and the sorcerer, yeah, well, now I have data that shows that doesn't have a big impact. Nobody wants them anyway.
Hardly anybody plays them.
Right?
I mean, comparatively speaking.
Yeah.
There are people there.
I am actually surprised that halflings are low down the list compared to... Like, it doesn't surprise me that they're lower down the list. But it surprises me that they got bumped down by Dragonborn, Tiefling, and Ganassi.
Yeah.
It actually surprises... They're not by much. I mean, Halfling and Ganassi are pretty much even.
Mm-hmm.
But it actually surprised me that Ganassi placed as high on the list as they did.
Well, that Tiefling split between Ganassi and Tiefling,
that's there is a big huge jump.
Yeah. But... Okay, so we talked about what's the most populous.
Mm-hmm.
Or most popular, whatever. What's going on down there at the bottom of the chart?
What, with the ASMR?
Yeah.
Well, that's the Ave Maria problem, isn't it? But you'll have to listen to another podcast we do to get that story.
There is nobody playing there.
Yeah, well, they're boring.
Yeah. 1.7% total?
Yeah.
So the least popular class is the ASMR Ranger.
Oh, yeah.
60 out of 100,000. Now, off the top of my head, I don't know what classes fit well with the ASMR.
Guessing they would be cleric. I think ASMR are charisma and wisdom, aren't they? In 5e? Okay. I don't recall off the top of my head.
Yeah, I don't either.
So
cleric and then sorcerer?
Yeah, it should be. Should see them as, well.
No. Paladin. Look at Paladin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, okay. Paladin, then cleric.
Yeah, so their charisma, then wisdom. So that it stands to reason that they... But see, this is the other thing that you have to think, though, is that there are going to be thematic pulls toward particular classes. So, like, tieflings could be equally good at warlocks or sorcerers. But they land in warlock at almost twice the rate because there's a thematic synergy there.
Yeah, there's all the extra planar stuff or whatever.
Yeah, and elves, obviously, elf ranger is going to land more than elf rogue. Even though ranger and rogue, they have plenty of crossover in what they need. So there's going to be those thematic elements. That's also why you see the half-elf bard represented so high. For whatever reason, people have decided that bards are the class of half-elves.
Yeah. I thought of a use for this.
Yeah?
For this layout, this table.
What's that?
If you have to populate your world with NPCs, this right here would be a pretty handy way to do it.
I suppose. But I just had a flashback to settlement building in 3.5.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that? Where you would you would build a settlement and then you would determine its population. It would have 10,000 people. And then there were all these rolls to determine the highest level of each class that was represented and how many members of each of that classes. So you would roll and it would be like, okay, so the highest fighter in this village or in this city is level 7. And there are, 200 level 7 fighters and 400 level 5 fighters. And there were all these formulas to calculate it. And then all the leftovers were divided between the NPC classes of Adept and Expert and Warrior and the other one.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so you would have this list where you literally had the total population breakdown of an entire settlement. So you knew exactly how many elf fighters there were in that city. And you never need that information. No.
But what I'm talking about is, okay, I'm making an adventure or whatever, blah, blah, blah. Oh, I'm going to have let's see, I need some kind of a paladin for this little bit of it. What kind of paladin do I need? Oh, let's see. Well, human paladins are the most populous. So if I wanted a lot, I could go human. Or if I wanted something a little rarer, I could go tiefling. And just work your way down there until you get to what you want.
You're looking at Dragonborn there for the paladin, not tiefling.
Am I?
Yeah, unless you want a really rare paladin.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, you're right.
It's funny that paladins and warlocks are right next to each other here by popularity.
Anyway, the point
they have
being,
a lot to talk about, I'm sure.
Yeah, they do, I'm sure. Have you considered your immortal soul today? Lord Cthulhu has.
Have you considered taking Bahamut as your personal lord and savior? Have you considered Asmodeus? Then it appears we're at an impasse.
Yes. Anyway, so you could use it in that way. You could say, all right, if I want something that's really kind of a rare combination that'll really stick out, then I might choose like a paladin. Let's see here, blah, 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 blah. I might choose an Aarakocra paladin. Yeah, because they are the least most common in this list.
Don't.
Well, I'm not suggesting it's a good use of it, but you see what I mean, though.
Yeah. I do see what you mean. But so now I have a question that is only tangentially related to this table, but of interest nonetheless. For you, sir. As a world builder.
Yes.
How many people in the world who aren't the PCs would you actually consider to be members of a class? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do know what you mean.
Okay.
I would say it would be very few.
Right.
I mean, depends on the style of the game. But I would very few overall would qualify as members of any given class. Probably those people would be key players in the story in some way. I mean, it seems unlikely that you would just wander into town and there would be, a town full of bards or whatever.
Right.
But
well, like, okay, so you have the city watch.
Mm-hmm.
Are those soldiers fighters?
Well, no, they're soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're NPC classes.
Well, those things, 5th edition, we don't have NPC classes anymore.
Oh, this is true.
NPCs don't have classes at all. It's just a matter of what abilities you give them.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing I noticed is that looking at the NPCs in the monster manual, a lot of them have 1 or 2 class abilities lifted from classes to represent the fact that they are, because the NPC does not need all the same class abilities as a PC.
Yeah, because in 3.5 or 3.0 you had soldier, you had a peasant, you had a farmer, you had a things like that. There were the 4 NPC classes: the adept, the expert, the warrior, and the one I can't, the commoner.
There you go. That was it. Everybody who didn't have class levels, everybody, like the pig farmer down the street was a commoner. And the scribe that you hired was an expert. And if you went to a healer and she had any magical ability at all, she might be an adept. But they were there so that PC classes could be ridiculously rare.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Uh-oh.
They took those NPC class things out of 3.5 and turned them into the backgrounds for player characters in 5e.
They sort of did, yes.
And then added a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So if you need an NPC in 5e with some sort of class kind of thing, shove one of them backgrounds on them.
Mm-hmm. Except that you wouldn't do that. Because most of the benefits from a background are things that the NPC is not going to benefit from anyway.
Right.
There's no, like, what 4th edition realized and 5th edition kept was the idea that monsters and NPCs do not need to be built like player characters. They need a very limited slate of abilities. But what is interesting is if you take the equivalent of an NPC fighter, that is, you have an NPC and he has a 1 representative ability off the... Let's take the rogue. Okay, if you have an NPC thief, does it have sneak attack?
Probably not.
Yeah, except you look at your monster manual and any NPC that is vaguely roguey really does have sneak attack. Or it has cunning action, or some combination of the two. Because those are like the signature abilities for rogues in 5th edition. So it is very interesting that those NPCs are basically scaled down members of classes.
Yeah.
They don't have as many skills and they don't have all the abilities. But what's also very interesting is that they do have a pretty complete slate of spellcasting abilities if they are spellcasters. So an NPC wizard has the same pile of wizardry that a PC wizard does in terms of number of spells and slots.
Well, a hedge wizard's got to make a living,
Yeah, but I was just curious, how many members of... Because I know some GMs who, every town soldier is a fighter. And every town has... there's like local wizards that you can go to and get services.
Well, it's nice just to sometimes. I mean, it's not an every time thing. Sometimes it's nice just to mess with the expectations of your PCs and players. So you have the town that all the soldiers retired to, or all the fighters retired to, whatever. And everybody's very polite, especially to guys with large swords.
Meanwhile, they're all complaining about their old wounds and how they all, every one of them is like, oh, earthquakes are coming. Or, yep, storms are coming. I can feel it in my old goblin wound. Players walk into any random temple in the world to a god. Mm-hmm. What are the chances that whoever is presiding over that temple, the priest or minister or rabbi or whatever, can actually provide them magical healing?
Well, actually, there's a bigger question than that.
Okay.
If they walk into a town looking for a temple, what are the odds that a temple to their particular deity exists?
Does it matter?
Does it?
I don't know. We're talking about a polytheistic culture here.
Would there be generic temple servicing all, or would there be a member of the clergy who was so deeply devout to his deity that he would deny services to those who do not at least pay some sort of lip service to him?
See, I would argue that would be pointless, because the thing is, in the sort of polytheistic society that D&D claims to be, okay, there is no point in appealing to I'm going to use 4th edition gods because those are the ones that are right on the top of my head, but any god is the same. There's no point in appealing to Ioun for healing or rain for your crops, because those things are not Ioun's purview. And no priest of Ioun would bother Ioun with an agricultural request. They would ask Pelor. Right? I mean, these gods all have spheres of influence, and, any priest, even if they specialize in serving a particular god's needs, assuming now, this is where we start to get into the question of, is there a difference between a priest and a cleric? But if you assume that this person exists to be a medium, a go-between between the civilized races and their gods, then that person should be equipped to communicate with whatever god needs to be communicated with based on the situation. So that they would know how, when someone dies, they got to know how to talk to the god of death. Because you ain't going to bother the god of knowledge with that, And when, and when there's a marriage or wedding to perform, they ain't going to do it in the name of the god of death. Because, except for
seems uncomfortable.
Right. Except that to death do you part thing. But so I would argue that any cleric that was doing that was doing a disservice to the gods and the people of the world. Which is also why I get mad when you have a PC who's like, well, I worship this particular god, and so if you don't worship this particular god, you don't get my help. And it's like, you don't understand polytheism, my friend. Your god's not trying to win the contest here. You're serving your god's interests because those align with you. You serve Moradin because you are, you come from a craftsmanship background, but you believe in hearth and community and the defense of the community and caste structures and law and society and all that stuff.
And also you're a dwarf.
Right. Well, sure, probably. But I actually, because I use the 4th edition gods in my world. So if you walk into certain communities, what you will find is that, first of all, every community has a shrine to the Raven Queen, because every community has to bury their dead. Now, does that mean there is a priest of the Raven Queen? Not necessarily. There could be one lay priest who handles it, all of the town's spiritual needs. But there is always one shrine to the god of the dead, because every community has to handle that.
And when you say shrine, I know what I feel like what you mean by shrine is not necessarily a big church and da. It could be like a pile of rocks and that kind of thing as just a place of observance or whatever. Right.
It is some representation of the god that is hallowed for performing rituals to the god.
Right.
Because the thing was, the whole idea with polytheism is that the gods are not omniscient and omnipresent. So the first thing you have to do is get their attention. And then you have to bribe them to serve your ends. You have to show them some sort of respect. Which is why sacrificing was a big thing. That's why you sacrificed a horse to Poseidon because he really liked horses. Right? And that was something you did to get Poseidon's attention and to kind of win him over to your side. And sacrifice doesn't necessarily mean killing an animal. Sacrifice is anything that you give to a god. But apart from that, there's generally one main temple or chapel or building. And the gods in the Angryverse are actually organized into churches. Which is not to say that, you believe in this god or that, only these three gods or whatever. But, for example, Pelor, Arathis, and Ioun together are the gods of civilization, and particularly the gods of humanity. Humans tend to, in their human settlements, they tend to build shrines to those, a temple devoted to those three gods who together are the gods of the Bright City. And that comes from the 4th edition lore that the three of them share that divine realm. The Bright City is shared by the three of them. And Arathis is the god of civilization and laws, and Pelor is the god of sun and agriculture, and Ioun is the god of knowledge and invention. So they sort of team up. So in that temple, basically pretty much most of a human community's stuff could be handled. And then of course the priest can handle other things as they come up.
Right.
Dwarven community, you have the Church of the Celestial Mountain, which includes Bahamut, Kord, and Moradin, who again, according to the 4E lore, they share the same divine realm, and dwarves tend to favor them, especially Moradin, but also Bahamut. And, and then you get other races who just, they favor one particular god, like, Dragonborn obviously worship Bahamut unless they're evil. The elves have shrines devoted to Corellon and Seanine, and in my world the elves have three shrines in their temples, one of which is left unadorned and blank for the day that Lolth actually realizes what she did and comes back to the fold.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so they want her to know that she's welcome back. She'll never take him up on it, but all elven. But this is just sort of general world building stuff. But even so, no elf, just because they revere Corellon and Seanine, or just Corellon or just Seanine, would ever say, oh, there's no such thing as Arathis, and would never pray to Pelor if their crops failed. That would be counterproductive because those are the gods that handle those things. How do you work it in your world?
Oh, how do I work it? I
What temples are available? Obviously, you might use different gods than I do, but
right. I don't have one specific method. I tend to do that which I find most interesting when the need arises.
I see. Rule of cool.
Yeah, well, I don't know about rule of cool, but the rule of interesting. Mm-hmm. Based on what the players and their characters have been up to and doing, they may or may not find what they need where they need it, or it may be what they expect, or it may not be what they expect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's just I like to keep that part of the world building fluid. I'll have a list. I'll know what gods could potentially be available.
Right, of course.
But I like to if I got a fighter that's, really big on Kord or whatever, there may be a place of Kord everywhere he goes, depending on his performance in the area or, how what his impression is on the people, that kind of stuff.
See, that's interesting because you're using your gods more for plot building in that case, and I'm using them more for world building. Because you will find shrines to Kord even in human settlements, but they're generally coastal settlements that rely on fishing or sea trade, because Kord is also the god of the seas.
Yeah,
and
if the fighter's been a particular bad influence in a given area or whatever, there may not be a shrine or church at Kord.
There might be one that has been smashed or defiled.
Right. It just kind of depends. I don't see the way I world build. I don't know that anybody else would or should do the world building the way I do it. I feel like that's about an hour-long discussion, though, and I don't know necessarily want to. I want a fresh episode to have that discussion in.
Yeah, rather than being 2 hours into the episode already, or wherever we're at now. Yeah, no, that's fair enough. But getting back to my original question, then.
Yes.
Players walk into a random temple because they need healing.
Uh-huh.
What are the odds that there is a priest in any random given temple in the Fiddleverse that can just conduct magical healing?
Pretty rare, generally speaking. I mean, again, I don't do it the way everybody else does it, but I would say in a major city, there's probably one.
Okay.
In a minor city or a town or whatever, a hamlet, there may just be somebody who happens to sell low-grade healing potions, or maybe just has an herbal remedy.
Yeah.
It kind of depends, which I realize is not an explanation, but that's the general rule of thumb. There's a general rule of thumb that the closer you are to a major population center, the more likely there is to be somebody who practices that sort of magic.
Right. But that stands to reason. I mean, magic is just another sort of expertise.
Right.
And that's always going to require the support of a large population base to make it cost effective.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, welcome back to Economics and World Building 101.
As goofy as my world building is, I do always like it to make some sort of sense within the context of the world they are in. There's very good reasons for things to be this way. It's not just arbitrary and random.
Right, of course. I mean, that's the whole point of world building, is to build up expectations, partly so that the players know what to expect, and partly because when you subvert those expectations, it tells the players something important is happening.
Mm-hmm.
So when the players they go to the one sea town that doesn't have a shrine to Cord, that may tell them something about a story that happened there.
Yes, something's up or something was up.
Right, yeah.
They have announced that they are actively working on a movie of Settlers of Catan.
Of course they are.
Of course they are.
Of course they are.
Sony is going to do it all up right.
Yeah, well, of course, if it's going to be anyone, it's got to be Sony.
Variety had a short report.
Did they?
Yep. They're in negotiations to acquire the rights to adapt Catan into a film.
Okay.
Gail Katz is going to be the producer. She's done Pawn Sacrifice. I don't know what that is. But she's also done The Perfect Storm and Air Force One.
Okay.
And on on the production team is Dan Lin, who produced It and the Lego Movie, and Jonathan Eyrick, I guess. Blaze Hemingway's doing the screenplay. I don't know. What is a Catan movie going to be? Do you think?
Well,
keep in mind, we had the Battleship movie.
Yeah, okay. See, here's the thing. I do want to make fun of this.
Uh-huh.
I really do.
Mm-hmm.
But, and that's the thing, is like, okay, we can say, yeah, well, we did Battleship, right? I mean, we're now converting board games to movies.
Uh-huh.
But that people also forget that once upon a time, there was a very delightful movie based on a board game called Clue.
Yes.
Right? Not to mention the fact that the Lego movie is not that far removed from a movie based on a board game. Because it's based on a toy with literally no story. And that was delightful. So, I could say there are, like, oh my god, they're making a board game into a movie, and that's stupid. But I'll withhold on that. But the thing is, what it like the Settlers of Catan movie will probably be indistinguishable from a movie that had nothing to do with the Settlers of Catan, but was instead about rival groups of settlers who go to a difficult frontier and who are, vying for resource. They come into conflict because they are both trying to build up a settlement or whatever and stake a claim in this new land. Basically, if you made a movie about European settlers coming to America, and fighting with French settlers and Native Americans, you could call that the Settlers of Catan movie. I mean, I'm reading, because you linked me the article, so I'm reading the article, and I love this line. We're excited to be working with Sony to bring the iconic world of Catan to life. What is iconic in that world? The little wooden houses? The
no,
bandit?
not really. Maybe. The roads?
The hexagonal board?
Well, I'll tell you what's iconic. Iconic is obvious.
Yeah.
Because it is the joke you make about Catan every time it hits the table.
Oh, I have wood for sheep.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah.
That's everything. That's the whole movie right there.
Well, that's okay. And that's the thing, is this could go in two directions.
Uh-huh.
Right? Because this could be just references. And then it won't get very far. Which is sort of the equivalent. I'm trying to think of a equivalent. Because even Battleship, Battleship just fell out of my memory. That's the thing, is I don't remember hating it. I don't remember liking it, but I don't remember hating it. But I don't remember any of it. It just didn't stick at all.
Right.
So which I guess doesn't say much for the movie. But
I think the important thing to consider with a Catan movie is that there's not just the Settlers of Catan game.
Right. There are expansions.
Oh, there's expansions. I mean, you've got, what do you got? Seafarers of Catan, you've got Knights and whatever, and you got, a couple other things going on. Mm-hmm. But it goes beyond even that.
Okay.
There is a game called Elisund, which is about building one town on the island of Catan. And there is a game called Candemir, which is about one person on the entire island of Catan, and he building up his own home and surrounding village things.
Okay.
So what I'm hoping is that we get another brilliant movie franchise, and we're going to call it the Tuberverse.
The Tuberverse? Like potatoes?
Like Klaus Tuber.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. Got it. Sorry.
That's really what I'm hoping for.
You're hoping to get a franchise out of this? Didn't we just discuss franchises?
Yeah. See?
I hate you.
Oh dear. It should be noted that Blaise Hemingway, the screenplay writer, his credits include the untitled Playmobil movie and Ugly Dolls.
So he's writing another movie based on a plotless toy at the same time. I really do. I want to make fun of the concept of the Settlers of Catan movie, but I really, at this point, I can't.
No.
Because it's, who the hell knows? And it's just gonna be inspired. It's just gonna have the name Catan on it. And it's gonna be about settling something.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there will be settling, and there will be a place called Catan. And it will be entitled The Settlers of Catan. After that, who the hell? It could be a frontier adventure movie, could be a frontier war movie. Who the heck knows? Could be anything. It would be really interesting if it was actually like a bunch of Imagine if it like completely screwed with everybody's heads. It came out and it was like a horror movie that was just like based on a haunted copy of the Settlers of Catan board game. Like, you know how every once in a while you get the horror movie that's based on something like that?
You mean like Jumanji?
Well, no, was Jumanji haunted? I thought it was just that was the way the game worked.
Yeah.
But though, Settlers of Catan as Jumanji would also be interesting.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. I don't know, man. It's just, I don't know what they're going to do. I have to point out, there is a Settlers of Catan novel that was written years ago and originally came out entirely in Germany, only in Germany.
Okay.
It was fairly popular amongst those who could read the language.
I found it on I found it on Amazon
Gable.
actually. So
Rebecca Gable and
I have the plot summary here.
Yeah, Lee Chadiane.
Well, Lee Chadiane is the translator.
Uh-huh.
So this is the English translation.
Go ahead, read it in.
The year is 1850 or is 850. I already failed.
Yep,
the year is 850. In the seas of northern Europe, the small coastal village of Ellesund falls prey to marauding neighbors. Their food stores pillaged, women and children stolen, livestock destroyed, the villagers are left to barely survive the harsh winter and contemplate a drastic solution to their recurring hardships, leaving the only village they have ever known. Foster brothers Candemir and Osmund lead their people on an epic quest to a mythic island home, but without knowledge of exactly where the island is. They must trust the gods to deliver them safely. Lost at sea and set adrift, an extraordinary violent storm washes them ashore. The island famed in pagan lore, Catan. Washes them ashore. Okay, no, that does work. Mm-hmm. They quickly set about building a new society, but old grudges, animosities, and social orders lead to fraternal strife. As the ideals of Candemir's Christian slave spread throughout the village and conflict with pagan law, the two belief systems clash. Actually, there is a movie in this.
There is.
There's a movie in this book, but this book has nothing to do with the board game.
Uh-huh.
Except that there are settlers and a place called Catan.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. I wonder if the book's actually any good.
Part 1, Ellesund. Autumn Moon. Ye gods, that's cold, Candemir gasped, for the plunge into the pitch-black water had taken his breath away. Why didn't we do this before the harvest? Only fools go swimming this late in the year. Osmond slowly moved his arms about to stay afloat. Stop whining. The 9-armed kraken will hear you shouting and come after us. Yes, or the 12-headed sea serpent. Boo! They laughed. Even in their callow youth they had held their swimming contests every harvest moon, and in those days the competition had been less about who would be first across the fjord than who could scare the other the more with their real or imaginary stories of sea monsters. And I'd keep reading this, but you know what?
What?
We're out of time.